Maso matono shel Talmud Chochem be'emes ve'emunah. The dealings, the give and take of a Torah scholar is with truth and with integrity, with uprightness. What does that mean? Truth, a person be truthful initially, but if one does not carry out his word, that's lacking, you cannot be trusted. Now, very often people, they'll say they'll do something, and they really believe they will, but they don't carry through. Emunah means you could be relied upon. A Talmud Chacham, not only is he truthful, he's reliable. If he says something, he carries through. Now, it's interesting. The Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us, that if a person tells someone he's going to give him a gift, or he will do something, and the person who's told this relies on what he hears, and he's counting on it. If the person does not carry through with what he said, he's lacking in integrity. Why? That since the person, he had said something which the person relied upon, how do you not carry through? Let's say initially I tell you something. I say, I'm going to give you a $10,000 gift, which is unheard of. If you believe that, that means you're totally gullible. He's a gullible person because nobody gives that kind of gift. It's a gross exaggeration. Therefore, even if the person does not carry through by giving the $10,000 gift, the person can come with a claim, I'm disappointed. I was counting on you. You can't count on that person because nobody would believe, if you're a rational person, that the man meant what he said. Therefore, the person is not lacking in integrity. But if you say something which is palatable, it's within reason to believe he will carry through. If you don't carry through, then you're lacking integrity, because you have no right to disappoint a person if you put yourself in a position to allow him to rely on you. That's the Talmud. A person who's a Talmud Chacham, his dealings are with truth and emunah. Whatever he says, you can rely on. His word is as good as gold, as they say. Oma lav lav al hein hein. When he says no, no means no, and yes means yes. If he says, I will not do it, I will not harm you, I will not compete with you, I will not infringe on you. If he said it, you can rely on it. You don't have to be concerned. And if he says he will do something positive, you can rely on it, he will carry through and do something positive. That's a Talmud Chacham. Now, why the Talmud Chacham? A Talmud Chacham, as we explained, is a person who's fully integrated, that his knowledge is integrated into his being. That's a Talmud Chacham. What you see on the outside, he's totally genuine. Now, what is Torah? Torah is truth. That means he's not only, he speaks truth, he is truthful. And because he's truthful, therefore, whatever he says, he speaks truth, and a truthful person carries through with his word. Otherwise, it's a compromise on truth. That's why it's only the Talmud Chacham. Another person believes he's going to carry through, or believes it's truthful what he says, but then somehow he compromises, because initially it's not emanating from a person who's imbued with truth. A Talmud Chacham is imbued with truth. Regarding anything he owes or he is incumbent upon him, he computes it exactly. It's unheard of for a person's Talmud Chacham that he should not carry through. When he owes someone something, he will always carry through to the nth degree. However, nosim vati lacherim. He was always, if someone else owes him, or he feels somebody should have done something, he's always willing to look away. He's always forgiving. It's okay. If he has an obligation, he will guarantee he will not leave a stone unturned until that obligation is fulfilled. But in terms of other people owing him or disappointing him, he's always willing to let it go. Famous story, as I always say, it's famous if you know the story. The Brisker Rav, who was the son of Reb Chaim Brisker, who was he fled from the Warsaw at the beginning of the war with a number of his children. And the only reason why he was able to flee, he borrowed money from a certain Jew. He borrowed money. And without that money, he couldn't have fled to pay for the train and the boat, whatever it was, till he fled out of Poland into a location of safety. And eventually, in 1941, he arrived in Palestine with a number of his children. His wife perished in the Warsaw Ghetto, and a number of his children perished in the Warsaw Ghetto. But he and a number of children were able to escape only due to the money that he borrowed from this person. He passed away in the early 1960s. After the war, he did not leave a stone unturned to locate the person he borrowed money from. Because if you're a debtor, you have to pay the debt. And whenever people would come to Israel, he would always inquire about this family. Did he survive the war? Because even if he didn't survive the war, if he has an heir, because the law is if you're a debtor to a family and the person you borrowed from is no longer alive, you have to pay the closest relative. So he literally was consumed with this. He has to pay that debt. Finally, in 1960, was a few years before he passed away, he heard that he perished in the war, this person who lent him the money. He perished in the Holocaust, but he had a relative, a grandson, or a son who lived in Switzerland. And when he heard about that, he was ecstatic because finally he's able to pay his debt. But to be obligated, not pay your debt, it's something he couldn't live with. But why? Many people borrow and then they forgot they ever borrowed. The other person could wait. But if you have an understanding of what debt is and what indebtedness is, not debt, indebtedness. If I'm a debtor, I'm indebted. If I'm indebted, I feel the obligation to address that debt.
Yes.
And until he was relieved of that debt, he was burdened. He was preoccupied with that. That's only because of his dimension of Torah that he was. He was a man of truth and did not compromise truth. And if you're indebted, you have to address that debt. You know, there's an expression, people turn over new leaves. You know, January 1st comes, everybody turns over a new leaf. You know, like, you know, in Canada, they have the Maple Leafs. You know, it's a hockey team, Maple Leafs. But turning over a new leaf, we're talking about a leaf like in a ledger, turn over a leaf. Okay, no, we're not talking Leif Erikson over here. Turning over a new leaf. Okay? When a person makes a commitment, I accept to act and behave differently, or accept certain responsibilities. How many people carry through? Why don't they carry through? Because initially, when they accepted that responsibility, they don't feel the burden of that responsibility. But the more you feel that burden, you're going to address it. I'll give you an example. What's a burden? If somebody weighs heavy on you and you're carrying a 50-pound sack for 3 weeks, you understand? You're weighed down by that sack. That's a burden. If you feel the burden, you address the burden. But if you don't even feel, it's like a feather's on your back, you have a thread on your back, you don't feel it, you don't address it. But if you feel it as a burden, the obligation is a burden. Carrying through with my word is a burden. That means you're burdened by it. As a result of being burdened by it, you're going to address it. But when do you feel the burden? If it's not in the physical sense. Unless you have a 50-pound weight on your back. When it's in your conscience. That's only if you're a person of truth. If you're a person of truth, and the more you're closer to truth, that burden weighs, and you have to address it, and you have to fulfill that truth and address the truth. That's only the Talmud Chacham who has that extra sensory perception and sensitivity to truth, he feels the burden if truth is anyway is going to be compromised for that reason. There's a famous story, Rabbi Leo Dessler, Zechet Tzaddik Levrocha. He has a famous work. It was translated in English. It's called Strive for Truth. In Hebrew, it's known as Michtam Elio, the writings of Elio. He was the Mashgiach in Ponovich. Originally, he was in England for many, many years. He went from Lithuania to England and spent many years in England, and eventually he moved to Israel, to Bnei Brak. And he was the Mashgiach in Ponovich. And during the war, he was in England with his wife and daughter, and he had a son who was in the United States, but come to the United States before the war. He'd studied it in Europe in Tel Yeshiva. And there was a rabbi who lived in the United States who came to the States in the early 20s. His name was Rabbi Eliezer Silver, famous Torah personality. He was initially in Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, then he eventually went to Cincinnati, Ohio. He was like the chief rabbi of Cincinnati. And during the war, because his father was so special, this Dessler, his father was a leading Torah sage in Europe, so he paid special attention to his son, took his son under his wing like as if he was his child, cared for him, provided for him, whatever he needed. And Rabbi Dessler hadn't seen his son since before the war. And he was come to visit him in the United States in 1952. First time he's going to see his son since maybe 1940, or even earlier. 1952, he's seeing his son. His son survived the war, he's in the United States, and he's in New York City, Rabbi Dessler. Picks up the phone, and he calls Rabbi Silver in Cincinnati. He'd like to come visit him. So Rabbi Silver's honored. This great rabbi. He says, what do you want to come? He says, I want to come speak to you about something. So he says, we can't discuss it on the phone. No, I have to discuss it in person. In those years, 1952, to go from New York City to Cincinnati by train, it was a whole day's travel by train. You take Adam, I'm just finishing up a shir in about 15 minutes. Okay, what? So what he said, I have to come in person. And he travels, this day's travel, he finally comes to Cincinnati. He catches it. In those years, they called a taxi at the Penn Station in Cincinnati, comes to the rabbi's house. The rabbi's excited. This great Torah sage comes to his home, offers him a cup of tea and something else, sits down. He says, tell me what it's all about. He says, I came to thank you for taking care of my son all the years that I wasn't here, and you treated him like a son. You were like his father. I came to thank you. So he was like taken aback. He says, you came to thank me? He says, you mean you couldn't have told me that on the telephone? Thank you for providing and taking care of my son. He says, no. He says, I had to make the trip from New York, as many hours as it took, to thank you in person. Why? Because when it comes to pay a debt of gratitude, a conversation on the phone is not enough. I have to show you to the degree that I appreciate what you did. It's paying a debt of gratitude. And the debt is so enormous in terms of what you provided my son. Could you imagine if I lend you $500 million and you want to say thank you? You're going to pick up the phone and say, by the way, thank you. And your whole success is due to that loan. You think a phone call is enough to say thank you? Your whole success in your whole life and whatever you've done is due to that, whatever that person provided for you. A phone call is enough. So based on the way you internalize that debt, how valuable is that debt? What did that debt do for you? My son was taken care of. I only have 2 children. One's a son. And he is fully functional. He is what he is due to Rabbi Silver's providing whatever he provided for him. Emotionally, materially, whatever it is. So if you really appreciate what the value of that is, a phone call is not enough. Even traveling by train 10 hours may not be enough. So again, it's the debt. The more you feel the burden, the more you reciprocate and more thankful you are, the more appreciative you are. But that's the Talmud Chacham. Only because he was a Torah sage. It's not a thank you. The Chovas Levavos, Duties of the Heart, is one of the only works, Mussar works, which was authored by an early commentator, writes that a person would only appreciate what God provides for us. And he goes to show the brain, the intelligence of a human being, the different parts of the brain, the ability to process information, retention of information, the power of speech, communication, just mechanical skills that we have, creativity, that we function, we digest our food, and we remain healthy, and we have appreciation, and we have the ability to have pleasure. Nothing more than that, basic functions of a human being. If you'd understand what God provided for you, as much as you thank him, it's not enough. Could you imagine, you go by, Norman could appreciate this. You go by Columbia Presbyterian or Cornell, buildings and buildings, multi-story buildings with all kinds of medical equipment, dialysis machines, heart-lung machines, every machine under the sun. What? To provide healthcare for people who, unfortunately, their kidneys don't function, their lungs don't function, the heart doesn't function. And God creates this little human being with 2 little kidneys, with a liver, and with this, fully functional. Could you imagine? Here you have to give billions and billions of dollars and endless hours of being occupied and preoccupied and research to deal with issues, and God gives a person a healthy body, healthy internal organs, fully functional. So how thankful should you be? If somebody gave you $1 billion to build a hospital and you'd be a doctor and be fully in operation, how thankful would you be? And God gives you a body and a life to be functional as a human being. How thankful are you? God, thank you. No, thank you. I'll see you at Yizkor and Yom Kippur. That's when I'll see you. I'll light the yahrzeit lamp. I'll send him my check, for holidays. I'll buy the ticket. You think God needs you to buy the ticket? He needs you to light the light. He wants one thing: be appreciative. Recognize who your benefactor is, who your provider is. Today with insurance, they say, who's your provider? Who's your provider? And you have to have it. If you don't have the card, who your provider is, you don't get medical care. It's out of pocket. Who's your provider? If you recognize who your provider is, he provides. Because you're truly deserving of what he provides to you. That's only a Talmud Chacham, person who has connected to truth because he's internalized his studies, which is truth. Therefore, everything about his life is within a context of truth and reliability for that reason.
Rabbi, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I was having some tech
When no sin demand mekach lauter, when he purchases something, he pays for the item he buys immediately. He doesn't have the seller waiting for his money, even though the seller is agreeable. You buy, you pay. Because you understand, the seller, he had to put out money to purchase whatever he sold to you. So by delaying payment, what are you doing? You're holding up the seller. He's in business to make money. Well, I'll eventually pay. No, you take your pretty time. He pays immediately. He's not a debtor. Doesn't want to be a debtor. He's okay when somebody else owes him money, but he should owe someone else money under no circumstance. He's not going to in any way cause any difficulty or hardship to anyone, therefore he pays immediately. Again, it's really putting yourself in the other person's place. When you put yourself in the other person's place, then you feel it. You feel the need to pay sooner. If you don't, then you don't. Okay. We're going to stop here unless, Naeem, you have a